And like within 9 months, she made 3 years of reading progress, right? There's also honestly the cost, and I will tell you it was worth every single penny. I'd do it 100 times over. The discussion in our house was essentially this is money that would have been spent on college.
Right.
And if we don't do this kid's not going to college.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. That's the sad truth.
There are lots of ways to be smart, and not everybody needs to go to college.
Right.
But you, as a parent, you want your kid to have all the options they can have.
And you want them to make the choice. This is just another episode of Dyslexia Success Stories. I'm Dr. Tim Conway. I'm a neuropsychologist. I'm peer-reviewed published in neurodevelopmental disorders, and that's the DSM-5 category for all learning difficulties, plus language disorders, autism, Down syndrome, a wide range of genetically caused learning difficulties. Also peer-reviewed published in neuroimaging for fMRI and other types of neuroimaging technologies. Peer-reviewed published also in neurorehabilitation. That means, what do we do when somebody has a brain injury and the injury causes loss of function or loss of skills and abilities? How do we measure it? But most importantly, how do you make weaker skills turn into strengths? How much can we rebuild and strengthen? So today we have the pleasure of jumping on the conversation with Jenny and talking about her daughter and her daughter's struggles with neurodiversity and multiple diagnoses of learning difficulties. And we're just going to kind of cover that story, because the goal is there more we can do than just accommodate, compensate, and use assistive technology? Is that the best we can do? Is there more potential benefits? And Jenny, welcome to the podcast today. And I don't know, which part of the country are you in? What state are you in today?
I'm in Colorado.
Oh, beautiful. And how much snow is in Colorado? I have to ask Florida.
Right now, none. We're out on the eastern plains. Now, the mountains has a lot of snow, but we're more like Kansas or the panhandle of Nebraska than the middle part with the mountains. So no snow today.
All right. Well, we're sure it's probably coming.
Yeah, we had just a touch yesterday, but it's already melted off. So
fantastic. Well, thank you for taking the time to join us for an episode of Dyslexia Success Stories. We know that you've been down a journey with your daughter, and we'll just love to hear, where did it start? When did you first notice there's any difficulties, and how did you try to start to figure that out?
So really, probably there were signs in preschool. She's our first. So so we didn't have an idea of how kids learn to read. And she went to a Montessori preschool, which was wonderful. But her preschool teacher said to me, she's not learning the names of letters as quickly as we think she would. Right. And she's a perfectly bright kid. So I went, well, yeah, you get to choose at Montessori. She probably does want to wash the doll clothes and hang them up to dry and do all these other really cool things.
A lot more fun.
More than the letters. And so I mentioned that my husband is dyslexic. But of course, your preschool teachers don't diagnose dyslexia or anything. They just could tell me what they saw, right? And then a second teacher indicated that she thought perhaps Maeve had trouble crossing the midline. I call my OT friends. I say, what does this mean? And, and
parent terminology. Did your pediatrician ask you about crossing the midline? Many times, no. Many times it wasn't in the parent books, but you're talking about, do they hand a ball from one hand to the other?
Right.
Can they go across the body and do something here? Or do they try to use the left hand to do the left side and the right hand to do the right side? And they don't really cross over. That's a developmentally important stage.
Right. And so after talking with my OT friends, I tested Maeve on our own. Right? Can you crisscross walk? Can you do all these things? And she could. She was a coordinated kid. She was in dance classes. And right. So I went. Then she went to kindergarten at a dual language school. Spanish immersion classes, which we thought was wonderful at the time. And it was, she could count to 100 in Spanish. Everything seemed great. She knew all her letters, and a lot of that was because of the Montessori. They did great work with her. So she knew her letter names. At the time, the Dibbles testing, the highest score you could get was green. Mm-hmm. All her subtests are green. Great. Nice. Everything's fine. At the end of kindergarten, all her subtests are green, but her composite's yellow. And I say, how could that be?
Yeah,
right?
That's
yeah. And so I asked the English teacher and the principal was wonderful. She got one of the experts from the CDE, the Colorado Department of Education, to talk with me even.
That's very nice.
Yeah, it was wonderful. But nobody really had an answer, right? They were asking me questions like, when she's trying to read, which way does she look?
Mhm.
And I'm going, oh, right. And so I, again, like kind of informally tested her and went, hey, Mae, what's the last sound in the word cat?
Mhm.
And she went, I don't know. And I went, well, what's the first sound? And she could do k, a, t, but she could not pick the t off the end, right?
Interesting. Yeah.
That's all just something I know. When she could pick out all the individual sounds, I went, you're fine, right?
Right. Seems good.
Yeah. And then in first grade, at the beginning of first grade, when they started doing sight words, she was lost, right?
Mhm.
And she had a teacher that I think, in a way that works well for lots of kids,
Right.
went quickly with the sight words. And she was doing wild guessing, right? Like guessing of sight words that had nothing to do with what the letters looked like.
Right.
So that is probably when I started arguing with the schools. Right? Like, why are we doing it like this? These sight words are decodable. What are you doing?
What's the logic here? Or what's the
Yeah.
rationale? Or what's the evidence base behind what's happening?
Right. And probably by the second quarter of first grade, I knew more about teaching reading than her teachers did.
Yeah,
Um,
unfortunately. Despite the teacher caring and wanting to be a successful teacher, as you just pointed out, and it's very popularly known today, many teachers didn't get reading instruction in part of their undergraduate teaching degree. They got a survey about what reading is, and they got a paragraph on what reading difficulties are, like dyslexia, but not really heavy-duty scientific exploration of how does the brain typically learn to read and what's the most effective approach.
Right. And really not even just practical, especially if you have a newer teacher, just like there are options for how to teach sight words, right? Do we teach them as word families? Do we teach them as, right? Are they connected to spelling lists? Like, so they had sort of like trendy things they were doing, like rainbow, write your sight words, and, but of course, none of that was working for her. And so then I tried to do some homeschooling with her, like maybe this class is just moving too fast. And that we tried, I don't know, am I supposed to name the names of programs that we tried?
No
Okay.
problem.
We tried Scalding, which I thought there were a lot of nice things about that program, right? And that worked some, but she wasn't, learning to read at the pace that the other kids were.
Right.
And so then at the end of her first grade year, we had her sort of screened. And of course, the screener said, I can't diagnose, the kid's dyslexic, right? And so there it is, the end of first grade, we know. Right. And I'm pretty good at research, and I have a master's degree in English, right? So I'm good at research, read a lot of stuff, right?
Yes.
So we knew early, and I just dove in and thought, okay, we'll get this handled, right?
We're going to figure this out. We're going to do it.
Right. And so then we took her to a different school that had a reading program embedded in it. It was the Take Flight program. She couldn't get into the program that year, but they had a really good, like this was just a Title I school, and they had a really good reading intervention where they did all kids on-level reading intervention, 45 minutes a day, 5 days a week.
Great.
It's amazing, right?
Super good high intensity, good high frequency, which if you understand how the brain works, high intensity, high frequency, more brain wiring and firing, better learning. That's just a great thing to have.
Right. Yeah. And but I've heard your talks about intensity, frequency, specificity, right? And so specificity wasn't there.
Yeah.
So then the next year, that district opened a magnet school that used Take Flight, and she was in then. Right. And really, we saw no improvement. And excuse me, I want to be careful about, I don't want to talk negatively about the school. They did many wonderful things, right?
Exactly. Typically, schools want kids to succeed. We're not
Yeah,
maligning schools, but the way I phrase it is, if we don't give pediatricians antibiotics, the pediatricians won't be as successful. And if schools are asked just to make it up, you go figure it out. Go buy something on the market and hope it works. It doesn't give the schools a high chance of success, especially buy something that's popular, like back in the day, Lucy Calkins and 3Qing and guessing. And finally, people have realized that's just been made up. There's no evidence behind it. And in fact, the evidence says it doesn't work very well. But all the schools were buying it because they didn't really have enough guidance to what to buy or what not to buy.
right.
Yeah.
And I think lots of kids make good progress in take flight. Maeve did not.
Yeah.
And so by that time, then I'm arguing with the specialty school. This program isn't working, right?
Yeah. Not accurate.
And so I think the other thing that I would say is I had worked, I stayed home with the kids. And then when they went back to school, I worked just as a special education para for a year, and really saw from the inside what the resources are in the
Right.
special education programs. At least my experience has been they don't have the resources
Right.
or the expertise to really address specific learning disability in reading.
Well, and it's an interesting model. So when you think about, okay, you've got a special ed class, in a regular ed class, only about 20% of the kids should be struggling to read if it's a dyslexia. So that maybe you got, 20 kids, it's only about 4 kids struggling to read. And the teacher can spend a little extra time with those kids. That sounds like it's possible to work it out if the teacher knows what to do and has the materials and the program. In special ed, it's very unusual when you look at it this way. You say, well, you know what? Let's give that teacher not 4 kids to help. Let's give her 20.
Right.
And let's give her a class of 20 kids and figure out, can she split her time across 20 kids well enough to help all 20 kids make progress? You're like, that doesn't make any sense.
Right.
He's going to have less time per kid. So, yeah, it's a very interesting
Right.
model.
And having seen a lot of IEPs in that position, I would say it's rare to see an intervention that is more than 3 times a week for 30 minutes.
True.
Right.
True.
So,
Yeah.
so I think you're not getting the frequency or the intensity there necessarily.
Exactly. That is another step that's going to work against the teacher actually being successful.
Right. And I should say, before we went to the public school, we went ahead and had a full neuropsych eval done.
Mhm.
And Maeve was profoundly dyslexic, first
Wow.
percentile in reading, right?
Wow.
So there were significant issues.
Yeah, there's pretty much no chance
Yeah.
that it's just going to catch up on its own. Or like, I don't know if you've heard me talk about this, Jenny, but my daughter at the end of first grade, my principal and my first grade teacher of my daughter came to me and said, it hasn't clicked yet. She needs a repeated grade. Some kids just click later in life. And we're like, okay, let me explain something to you. As a brain scientist, there's no anatomical structure we call the click, and there's no brain processing we call clicking. So you're telling me she has not learned how to read and you don't know why. I'm like, okay, I do. And it's not just going to get better because she got older. It needs to be explicitly, systematically, and hopefully an evidence-based program that's been proven to be successful. So
Right.
it's a better understanding to know it's not just she needs to get older and she needs to mature.
Right. Right. And I think, one of the things too, just through this section is what your kid's internalizing. And I will say the magnet school was wonderful for her in
Yeah.
terms of self-confidence.
Mhm.
But what your kid's internalizing is I'm dumb.
Yeah.
Right.
I can't
And
do it. I can't read. My classmate over here is reading. My classmate over here is reading. And typically what girls will do is open the book and flip the page like everyone else to not look different.
right.
They don't want to look different. They don't want to be seen as they can't do it. Boys, more characteristically, are going to get upset, frustrated. They're going to act out. And that's why we used to believe it was 3 boys for every 1 girl who had dyslexia, because that's what it looked like.
Right.
And then when they actually went and did the studies of the frequency or prevalence of dyslexia, found out actually, no, it's like about 1.2 boys to every 1 girl. The difference is the boys act out and get identified sooner and get sent for testing, and the girls withdraw and sit back and hide in the book and maybe someone doesn't pick it up. It sounds like with Maeve, 1%, it's pretty hard to miss that one if you're reading at the 1% percentile.
Yeah. And I just think about like not only did she internalize that, but then everything that goes with it, right? The world's not discoverable.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Like
Yeah,
I can't, there's no point in trying to read. There's no information available there. Right.
Yeah.
The imagination that she used those days to sit through school, right? And to think from such an early age that this is pointless. I don't learn. Right.
Yeah. Counterproductive in many, many ways. But at the same time, I want to make one comment about something you just mentioned, because this is a really important piece that not everyone understands about dyslexia. Is people don't understand that dyslexia does not genetically endow you with other strengths. No. There are not 5 superpowers every dyslexic has, despite popular rhetoric from some groups. I wish that was true. There's no science that backs it up. But what you said was, if Maeve's sitting there and she realizes that she can't learn and not learning well, but she just might be daydreaming. It might just be picturing stuff in her head. So she's actually building imagery skills, which are great to have. And the more she practices them, the stronger they might become. And so the brain is what we call an experience-dependent plasticity learning organ. The practice and the experience you give it is what it's going to build. And the better the developmental hierarchy from basic skills first and advanced skills last, and those other components of intensity, frequency, specificity, developmental hierarchy, duration, all those together give that brain also better chances of building skills. But if you practice a skill over and over again, and it's not an impaired area or a deficient area of how the brain's communicating, that skill should get better. So great, Maeve's building imagery skills, but that doesn't help if you can't read.
Right. And it's interesting you say that, because in the Spanish classroom, then her testing for her oral, like ear memory, was amazing, because she's hearing all these Spanish words, right? So yeah, I don't know where necessarily I was headed with that, but I asked her, I said, is there anything you really want me to talk about?
Yeah.
And she said, tell people how hard it is.
Yeah. Because she was, as you were saying, she's experiencing it. I'm not a learner. The world's not discoverable for me.
Right.
I'm not going to be able to figure this out, which leads to a less engaged student.
Mm-hmm. And she was like, the teachers try to help me, but they can't. Right. So then they kind of give up on her too. Right.
Which reaffirms for her that, okay, my brain must be the problem, because the teacher goes and helps this kid, the kid gets better at reading. And the teacher helps Johnny, and he's getting better at reading. And the teacher comes to help me, and it doesn't get better, and then she stops coming.
Right. And it's insidious, right? Just the other, I think yesterday, we went into a place to eat, and the sign said, please wait to be seated. Now she can read the sign, but it doesn't occur to her to read it, right? Because
she's not used to being able to do that.
Yeah. And so still, even years after she's been able to read really pretty well, it's still not natural to her to be like, well, the way I figure things out is by reading, right?
Because that wasn't her earliest learning experiences.
Right.
Yeah.
And for really several years.
Right. And for many years thereafter.
Yeah. It's better now, but we'll have to remind her, like, you can read the menu, right? Like, go ahead, take a look. You don't have to know what you're going to get. Just when you walk in the door, you have choices.
Yes. And we had one example of the menu reading with a 16-year-old, which is, we asked him, okay, how do you deal with menus? Because we know you can't read them. He said, I just order the same thing at every restaurant. I don't need to see the menu. I just say burger and fries. So I'm pretty sure about 90% of the restaurants my parents take me to will have a burger and fries. And that was his compensatory skill. Way to work around it, try to hide it, try to avoid it, and not let people know that he couldn't read the menu.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, then back to the sort of the journey. We ended up moving away from the city that had the magnet school, to a small rural town. And I went in and just said, I'll do this. Right. Because I knew, for the most part, I knew more. Right. And at that point I had read Kilpatrick's, Essentials of Reading Success, I think, right? And that was the first time that I was like, oh, I kind of understand what dyslexia is. Right. So we were doing the phonemic awareness exercises. We were doing toe by toe, which was really, I think, a good decoding program, right?
Lots of focus on part nonsense words, part real words with toe by toe. Again,
Right.
not an evidence-based program, something somebody made up with good logic, good structure, and hope that would help some kids. And if you really have a mild deficit, that's probably going to be enough.
Right.
But if you have a more moderate to more severe deficit, it's going to be what we call a print to speech program. It's going to letters, just like Take Flight goes to letters, just like most all OG programs go to letters first. And why am I reading? There's so many programs that I can't even keep all the names straight. Most of them go straight to letters first and then try to go to sounds later. But think about it this way: developmentally with the brain, nobody reads and spells before they speak. And so the first language skill is speaking skills and hearing words and taking in words. And that's that phonological system where you begin to build your awareness of the sounds in words, the number of sounds, 3 or 5, the order of sounds. And like you did with Maeve, and I want to ask you, how did you know to do that with Maeve? You asked Maeve, tell me the last sound of cat. How did you know to ask her that? Was that something you'd come across in your Masters of English training, or something you just picked up in your exploration of book reading?
So no, it's just mostly I'm an information junkie. So when she got the yellow composite,
Right.
I started looking at
What's
and
that?
just started reading what I could find really fast, and went, oh, okay, well, there's phonemic awareness, and you've got different positions in words, and not knowing where that would lead me. That one day I'd be saying to her, say peach backwards, right?
And seeing how much she could do.
Yeah.
And Kilpatrick's program took pieces of multiple programs. So it took a little bit of this study, a little bit of that study. When you do that, the problem is nobody knows what the outcome is going to be, because the new approach you've made up has never been tested.
Right.
Not been studied. There's no evidence it's going to work. That would be like saying, and I use this analogy a lot, so I'm sorry if the viewers have heard it before, but I don't know a better way to explain this. If we say, hey, there's 3 antibiotics, I'm going to take a chemical of each antibiotic and put them together, and then I've got a new antibiotic. Well, there's no proof of that. I mean, you could actually have a new poison. I mean, it's like there's no way to know unless you actually study it and test it and prove it works. And what's unique about Kilpatrick's approach was, and what he may not have understood, because he's a psychologist, not a language development expert, is the phonological processing. If you just do verbal tasks, you're just working that acoustic system. And we know from developmental experts that the phonological system is not just an acoustic only system. That's one of 4 sensory systems needed to build those skills that we call phonological awareness.
Right. And I don't know if you're supposed to call it this anymore, but she had what people will call double deficit dyslexia, right? With the rapid automatic naming.
Yeah, it's a research term. It's not a DSM-5 diagnosis, but in research, we've noticed that when kids have trouble repeating words over and over again that they know, and how they test this with is they have a rapid automatized naming test. Mm-hmm. And one might just be 6 color blocks, and maybe it's the same 6 color blocks, but they're randomly listed in a page of 50 blocks, but it's the same 6 colors. They're just kind of scattered, and we ask the child, read across the top row, then read the colors of the second row, and all you're looking is a color block, and tell me red, blue, green, red, green, blue, yellow, white, and you're saying words we know the kid can say. But some kids can't do that. Right. You'll see a very labored effort. They'll go red, yellow, red, green, and they're just struggling to get the words out. And that, like you described, then we call that a double deficit dyslexics. They have the poor phonological awareness, they have the poor reading and usually poor spelling problems as well, but they also show this retrieval struggle. And why we think that's important is if you teach them to sound out words and they sound out the word, slip on the top of the paragraph, the first paragraph, and 4 lines down, the word's there again, odds are they're not going to remember what they just said, because that retrieval system is not as strong either. So that's why the double deficit is important.
And as the parent, you watch that, how you're going, you read that 5 words ago.
Yeah.
What's happening here?
I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. And so then, so I was doing that, and I think we were making progress with the phonemic awareness and the decoding.
Right.
But then I'm still constantly researching, right? And this is a mother-daughter strain when you're like,
Yeah.
here's the hardest thing in the world for you, and we have to do it for 20 minutes every day.
And I'm going to help you.
And I'm going to help you. And I barely know what I'm doing.
And many kids, not anything about the parent, many kids do not want their parent to be their teacher because they
Right.
don't want to underperform. They don't
Yeah.
want to make mistakes. They just want you to be their parent who loves them unconditionally, lets them explore the world, lets them have fun, lets them make mistakes. Not a big deal. But when the parent becomes a teacher for some kids, it becomes a really big stressor.
Yeah. And you know, these kids develop so many amazing coping skills, right?
Mhm.
Like we got to the point where when I was helping her, when she would try to read the words, I had to close my eyes so that I wasn't giving her any signal about if it was right or
She's
wrong.
watching the facial expressions. She's looking for what's the mom say,
Yeah.
is it a proper or is it a B? And
Right.
oh, it's a B. She
Yeah.
shakes her head up and down on the right answer. Yeah.
Right. And I thought I was like controlling it. And really, I mean, I don't know what she was picking up on, but and then in the meantime, I'm going, okay, great. We're getting through this decoding book and things are going well. And she knows what I mean when I say read to the rhyme. And like, but now I'm frantically researching what's next, right? Got the glass beads and the Elkonin boxes. I'm looking at
Right.
structured word inquiry, right? Like,
Yeah.
and so
So much.
there's the strain for her and then the strain for me too,
Yeah.
right? Like, I still am convinced I know better than most of the people in the schools, right?
Right. Yeah.
And have the
And you
time,
know she can do better. You know her potential is higher than this.
right?
You know, she shouldn't be reading at grade level because what many parents don't know is grade level on the bell-shaped curve is at the 30th percentile.
Yeah.
Nobody should be happy with that because only 30% of kids have IQs at the 30th percentile. 70% of kids have higher IQs, so their reading skills should be higher than grade level to be on par with their IQ. And then that's what most parents kind of innately know, not with my mathematical detailed discussion of it, but they know that this shouldn't be so hard for her. She should be able to do this better. She's smart enough, and she should be able to do this.
Yeah. So at that point, I had seen you talk on YouTube maybe a year before, right? And you'd been sort of burned in my brain. I remembered you talking about frequency, intensity, specificity. I remembered you talking about developmental processes coming online in a specific order.
Yeah.
And at the time, we just didn't move on it because we'd been sold so much snake oil by
Right.
well-intended people who, you know, and I shouldn't say it's snake oil. It probably is helpful for some people. It wasn't helpful for me.
Well, it typically is not going to have a high chance of success.
Yeah.
Because most of those programs have never been tested. We don't know what their success rate is. We don't know what their average gain is because they've never been scientifically put into a research study.
Right.
Unlike Now Programs and the Now Foundations program that we put out there online at nowprograms.com, we did 3 5-year randomized controlled trials. These are multi-million-dollar projects. It took 15 years of my life just to do that research to make sure that we knew exactly how much gain kids could make. We know it's about 22 to 25 standard score points. That's like taking a kid from the 5th percentile to the 45th percentile. We know that should be our average gain if the child just has mostly a dyslexia without many other co-occurring deficits, maybe a little ADHD as well. Because in our research studies, we had high incidence of both severe dyslexia, and 70% in one group, 81% in the other group also had significant attention problems.
Right. And Maeve was diagnosed with ADHD, dysgraphia, dyscalculia. All right. And then the slow processing speed, which until much later, I didn't understand what that meant. And you had made a post about it. And I went, oh,
yeah,
that's what that is.
It's misnamed. I mean, most people think, oh, my child doesn't really think very quickly. And that's like, well, if that's true, then they would not think quickly about anything or any activity or any skill. Because if you really have slow processing, you're most likely going to be diagnosed with an intellectual deficiency, a lower IQ. And you're going to be slower to learn any material of any subject or any skill set. But unfortunately, the IQ test has a category called processing speed, but but it's actually just a visual motor test, a couple of visual motor tests. And that's not all brain function. It's just visual motor skills, eye-hand skills with pencil and paper.
Yeah. And I will say also the really wonderful neuropsychs that we've worked with, because I had my son tested as well. We knew he wasn't dyslexic, but when he had the score on the WISC-5 that showed the slow processing speed, I asked, does he need OT? And they went, well, that's an interesting question, but not, because neither one of my kids would strike you as someone who needed OT, right? Like that's that they don't struggle with fine motor tasks in any noticeable way, right? Like it's not
a severe impairment.
Yeah. Yeah. And so anyway, then we decided to take the plunge and do the NOW program, the NF.
And what convinced you to give that a shot? It's because you've already done Take Flight, you've already done, I can't remember the other program you mentioned.
We'd done Take Flight, we tried some Spalding.
Yeah, Spalding.
We did the toe by toe, that we're doing the phonemic awareness exercises.
Kilpatrick auditory training exercises.
Yeah. She'd had in school OG, which everyone says OG is the gold standard, right?
And when we say everyone, let's say the educators all say that. None of the researchers say that. The educators all say that. Yeah. Because
when you get a kid with significant phonemic awareness deficit and you're teaching them to go, right? Now the word's cold and there's not a fourth spot and they're going, oh, old, right? And so the sounds and the movements aren't connected. So we'd been through all of that. And I just went, well, here's the next thing. And if it doesn't work, then we'll find the next thing. Right. But
and it's interesting for me to point this out. It wasn't the amount of science that we had done. It wasn't the amount of studies we had done. It wasn't my training as a neuropsychologist, who I'm also dyslexic, but I got prevention at age 5. So I'm an early empowered dyslexic. It really was just, okay, we've tried all these others. This is another one we might try. It's got some logic to it, which is puzzling to me as the brain scientist. Like in healthcare, that's not how things operate. In healthcare, everything's based on what does the scientific research tell us is the best thing to try. But in education, it's like, well, what does my teacher think? What does the principal think? What do these people think might happen? Not as what anybody really have proof or evidence is going to give us the best chance to get the best outcomes. It's a different design. It's a different way for a profession to function.
Right. And I will also say, just speaking from the parent side of things, there's an element of accessibility, right? So the online piece is nice, but you have to find a way to fit that into your day. There's also, honestly, the cost, and I will tell you, it was worth every single penny. I'd do it 100 times over. But and my husband and I were talking about it.
It is. It's still an investment. And just for the audience to say, when we started the company, it was $75 an hour. For the first 10 years, I was able to keep it at $75 an hour. In the last year, I've had to raise it, and I'm probably going to have to raise it again because our costs just keep going up and going up. And it's not because we have high margins. It's because it's hundreds of hours of training of the instructors. It's a whole quality control team tracking the instructors. I mean, you're not buying a tutor. And we have to really explain this to families. With nowprograms.com, you're actually buying the knowledge and expertise of a whole team, from the neuropsychologist, published brain scientist, to the speech pathologist, to the administrative staff and personnel, to the instructors, some of who've worked with me for more than 20 years. And so it's a collective expertise that you're purchasing at that rate. And we could do it twice a week, but it would end up costing you like 10 times as much, because we'd make such little progress, and we may even risk making the child feel like, oh, this program is not working either because I'm making no progress. And it's actually not the child, and it's not the program. It's that we lowered the frequency so low, you are not giving the brain the best chance to build the skills.
Right. So, yeah. And, the discussion in our house was essentially, this is money that would have been spent on college.
Right.
And if we don't do this kid's not going to college.
Exactly. Right? Yeah, exactly. And that's the sad truth.
There are lots of ways to be smart, and not everybody needs to go to college. but you, as a parent, you want your kid to have all the options they can have.
And you want them to make the choice. You bet.
Yeah.
You want them to be able to choose. Do I want to go into a trade? Do I want to go into, a young entrepreneur? Because that happens a lot more today than ever before.
Yeah.
Or do I want to go to college first and then do something else?
Right.
And you want the kids to have the choice.
Yeah. Yeah. And, that also goes back to what you were saying before with the idea that there are these mysterious strengths that come with dyslexia, right? Like, I will shamefacedly admit that I'm like, what if you're dyslexic with no strengths? I'm Googling this, right? Because I'm not like, she's not building castles out of Legos, right? Or whatever the...
Right. She's not a better communicator because she can't find her words sometimes.
Right.
There's different things that come along with it.
Yeah. I will say, and this is the strengths that show up are really probably compensatory, right? She notices stuff that nobody else does because she learned early. The main thing they're talking about doesn't make sense to me. I'm going to look at this other stuff going on. And so she's
got to find a route. Yeah, you got to find some route to learning.
Yeah.
And some people say, well, I don't want to put my kid in instructor because you're going to change their personality and change how they think. I'm like, no, actually, we're not going to take anything away. We're just going to add that literacy is now easier. And so then they actually waste less time on the reading side of life and can do it effortlessly so they can read whatever they want, so they can explore more of their interests at a higher level. And then just a win-win by adding literacy on top of what other strengths the child's already built.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so really with, we just kind of, it was such a relief to me. There are so many emotions that go into this, little grief, anger, frustration, worry, fear, right? The one that'll bring you to your knees is relief.
Yeah.
And so
that's the thank God action. Thank God. Thank goodness.
Yeah. Yep. And so we left the tutoring alone and just sat back for a month, and all of a sudden kid could read.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and that's impressive too, because I'll be very blunt and say, Jenny, some parents can't do that. Right. Some parents, they've been so invested in helping that we actually have parents and the kids online and the kids got the headphones on. The parents like, take those off. I want to hear what's going on. And the parent starts answering some of the questions for the kid. And you start asking, excuse me, miss, I need Jimmy to answer the question. I need him to tell me what he's thinking. That's how we're going to help Jimmy. And in the parents' defense, they've been so invested. They've worked so hard to try to make some success that it's hard to back off and just step back and say, I trust these people. They've been doing it this is now going to be our 12th year for that nowprograms.com company. It's actually our 39th year in the Moore Center clinics with the moorecenter.com. So for 39 years, the clinics have been pioneering this, put it into practice, and I've been there for 36 of the 39 years, which is just crazy. I didn't know that was going to be where my whole career focused. But luckily it did. And that's because I helped my own kids. And that's a different story. But yeah, so the relief is a big piece. But you actually were able to step back and just let the process happen.
It was necessary, right? Like, because in all the other programs that I'd researched, it became clear that to have this done in a way that was affordable or even like, even just in a way that was realistic, I would have to become Barton trained or Wilson trained or CALT trained or, whatever.
Which has its other challenges. It has its other expenses. It's your time. It's other expenses for costs for training. I've even had parents who went back to grad school and got a master's degree in special ed, thinking that's going to give them the answers to help their kids. And then they realize it didn't. Right.
And all this time, I've known my kids dyslexic since the end of first grade. And TikTok, the time just keeps going where she's not learning to read. And now we don't really have time for me to go get trained.
Right.
And then deliver a program that's going to take years.
Right.
Right. Like this, because of course, with the Matthew effect, right? The less she's reading, the less she's reading. Right.
Right. 100%.
And so anyways, and for Maeve and me both, it was time for someone else to do it.
Yeah. Well, she tolerated mom as teacher for quite a few years. To your credit, you guys really put a ton of energy and effort into tackling this. What was Maeve's feeling of this crazy program? And I always just tell kids, look, I'll be upfront with you. It's the weirdest thing you're ever going to do.
Right.
I try to tell parents, if your kid's 10 or above, please watch the movie Karate Kid. And tell them you're about to do Karate Kid stuff with the mouth and letters and sounds of wax on, wax off. It may look like it has nothing at all to do with literacy, but trust me, there are decades of brain science behind what we're doing.
Right.
Did she have any thoughts about it? What was going on? Do you think you lost your rocker and bought some crazy program that she didn't know how to move her mouth to make sounds?
Nope, she just thought it was fun. She liked her tutor, and it may be the first time that it was like, okay, they tell me to do this and I can do this and I'm making progress. And
Nice.
she enjoyed it. She looked forward to it.
Fabulous. That's what's
Yeah.
supposed to happen.
Right.
It's not always easy to make that happen, but when it all works right, all the pieces of the puzzle fall into place, it should be more effortless. We've scaffolded that Now Foundations program in such a way to keep a success at least at about an 80% or higher level.
Yeah.
And then if they've mastered it, then we raise the task, and then they got to catch back up, and then we raise it. But you're making small incremental steps up along the way, so it never is too frustrational and different than any of the print to speech phonics programs. You're not asking them to memorize anything.
Yeah.
Actually, discovery-based, sensory-based, integrated, interactive, challenging learning in some ways.
Yeah. Well, and for her, that gave her the autonomy. Here it is. I can learn. Right. And
and now we're trying to rebuild her self-esteem of I can learn. I can do this. But it's going to take us 3 million successes to undo the 1 million failures she's had, which that's the hard part about it.
Yeah. So that went really well. And like within 9 months, she made 3 years of reading progress. Right. But she was still guessing at words that I thought, why are you guessing? You can read now. What are you doing still guessing? Right.
Yeah. So by reading, you're saying she was able to sound out 1, 3, 5 syllable words, but she might be misreading that or through or, whomever, just some smaller words that she's or form from.
And even still guessing at words that she could have decoded. Right.
So not always consistently decoded.
Right. And so then I mentioned it to Michelle, and she went, maybe we should do a screening for visual stuff. Right. So we had that happen. I wrote this down so that people could see, so this is a U and an E, right? Yeah. And what we found out was she had trouble with visual closure. So she might see the line from the U and the curve of the E and think it's an R, right? Yeah. And so, great. Now you have the skills to decode. But if the letters aren't coming in right.
Yeah, if you're not perceiving all the shapes and recognizing all the shapes, it's what we call a visual perceptual, visual recognition. Some people now use a big catch-all term called orthographic processing.
Right.
There's no orthographic processing part of the brain. There's visual parts of the brain that are perceptual and memory and visual recognition. And those parts make up a function that is orthographic processing, which is the ability to perceive letters, recognize groups of letters like words. That's just specific to using visual memory for written language.
Right. Yeah. And so just for other parents who might be seeing something similar, right now we've tackled all of this. There's still those issues. And she would describe, she couldn't read certain fonts. And she would, if she read a lot, she would say that the page just turns into zebra stripes, right? Like my brain's tired. And it just looks like zebra stripes, right?
Yep.
So we did the OT screening, and then I think there is a place in Colorado that does sensory integration.
You bet.
OT. And I talked with them, and it was going to all be online. And also for those who might be wondering, why can't we do the OT online? Your therapist has to be licensed in the state you live in, right?
Yes. You can't be an OT in Florida helping a kid in Colorado. That's illegal.
Right. Yeah. And so, so we'd had so much success with both NF and NMI that I just went, we're not messing with it. Pack your bags, everybody. We're going to Florida this summer.
There's worse places to go.
Right. And And we, honestly, we didn't know what we were getting into, right?
Mhm.
This was another leap of faith for us. If
Right.
I had known, I would have signed my son up then, right?
Yeah.
But we went, we don't know how much of this insurance is going to pay, and
Right.
we don't know,
Right.
we don't know how well it will work.
Mhm.
Um, and so, and honestly, people would ask me what's going on at OT. And I would just be like, I don't know. They're playing games, right? I
And let
hope
me let me
we're
throw
not.
the image up here. So this is the sensory pyramid. Dr. Diana would have shown it to you, and she's a
Mhm.
OT of more than a few decades.
Yeah.
She's actually the clinic director of the Moore Center in Ocala, Florida. So she would have given you extensive training, Jenny, in what this graph is about. But for the viewers, it's just basically saying there's a developmental hierarchy of how the brain builds sensory and motor skills. And I've done other podcasts about it. So there's other podcasts about sensory processing development. But basically, they're trying to let you know we're going to work in a hierarchy from basic lower level skills to mid-level skills to higher level skills. At the very top of that bar, then we get into communication and interpersonal and academic. These are the highest level skills. And when all the pyramid's working, this is that number one goal. You have the very top bar, which is joie de vivre, which is the joy of life. Because now she can adapt in any way she needs to do whatever she needs to do. And the brain's got the skills to be able to do it.
Right. And she was probably in that yellow spot with the ocular, right?
Right. Yep.
And the fine motor. And so, she just thought she was having fun at
It's
the.
in a gym. It's got swings. It's got climbing equipment. They got fine motor activities, tabletop stuff. Yeah, it looks like what our parents would call romper room.
Yeah.
Just some kind of fun play space, or But it really, the experts of the OT knows which activities they want you to be working on that build which level of system. And once you've mastered that, okay, what activity builds a next level system, and there's this developmental expertise that comes if the OT, because not all OTs, well, actually, almost no OTs come out of this grad school trained in this. It's if they have the expertise and are sensory integration certified. And there's one university that does tremendous amounts of work on this. It's the University of Southern California in Los Angeles. I pay for all of my OTs from the Moore Center clinics in the Jacksonville, Florida area, in Ocala, and even our Caribbean clinic in the country of Trinidad Tobago, which for those who want to know, yeah, the prices are cheapest there, just because my overhead cost is lowest there. But all the OTs get trained in the 3 courses that are online courses that University of Southern California provides to give you a certificate in sensory integration, theory, assessment, and treatment.
Right. Yeah. And because I have a couple of good friends who are OTs.
Yeah.
And when I talk to them about it, they're like, yeah, that's out of, I don't know, that's out of my area of expertise. Right.
Training you. Yeah.
Yeah. And when they would ask me what went on there, I would just say, I don't know, voodoo. Right.
Well, it's kind of like asking the heart surgeon, what are you doing there? He's like, well, we just kind of repair the heart.
Yeah.
To explain every step of what they do, it's like I can't give you my MD knowledge of thoracic surgery in just a few sentences.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of hard to explain it. OT is the same thing. So I say, well, we're going to work on motor skills to get to these skills, get these skills. And how we're going to do it, that's really complicated. That's why Dr. Kumakins went to grad school, for 4 years after undergrad to get her doctorate in OT. That's that extensive knowledge base that gives you the expertise to know what to do and how to do it.
Right. And this, I do want to point out too, the skills are really transferable in a way that you might not expect. Like the first time that we knew OT was working, we were staying in this Airbnb. The steak knives were terrible. They were so dull. And Maeve was cutting her steak and said, whoa, these knives are really nice. These are sharp. Right. Oh. And I went, oh, wow, this kid must have struggled to cut her meat for any number of years, not in a way that you'd notice, right?
Right, because now she feels like it's a lot easier.
Right.
Fascinating.
And so there were lots of little things like that, right? Yeah. That and as far as I know, they never worked on her handwriting.
No.
But all of a sudden, and this I'm sure is part of the visual closure and visual perception stuff, her letters are evenly spaced. They're in a line, the words. Anyone who's got a kid with dyslexia or dysgraphia has seen the way letters can get spaced out and words get weird spacing, and all of that just instantly better. I shouldn't say instantly. It's a lot of hours over a couple months, but
And Jenny, I didn't ask you this ahead of time, so I'll ask you right now. Do you mind if I throw up her graph of her OT pre-post?
not at all.
I'm going to throw it up here on the stage so people can see the blue bars are where she was before OT treatment. And these are nationally normed standardized tests that measure OT skills. The green bars are where she was after, was it about 6 weeks you guys were in Ocala?
8.
8 weeks. Okay, so after about 8 weeks of several hours per day, 5 days a week of OT. And I point this out to say, and we don't have a problem saying this, she didn't test very well on some of the skills. They didn't show a lot of change. Some showed no change, but several of the visual perceptual, visual memory, visual tracking skills made tremendous progress, like going from below the 16th percentile all the way up to the 60 or 75th percentile. So then we knew that we could functionally change those skills. The unique piece of testing is sometimes testing doesn't capture the gain because it's one snapshot of time. But when you see it functionally and you say, well, yeah, we know it changed because now she does this and she didn't used to do that before. And now she does this and she didn't used to do that before. And that's when you're trying to look at the qualitative observational changes plus the quantitative, which comes from testing. And both help us figure out what to do. So that's powerful that she made those functional changes and you guys could see it.
Yeah. And from someone who's read a lot of what's out there about dyslexia intervention, I will tell you, none of that is out there.
Right. Right.
Or perhaps in some journals I haven't read and couldn't easily read, not having a medical background.
Yeah.
But you're not running into that information. So there can be more to the dyslexia than
just the phonological piece. It's just
the phonological.
Yeah.
Right.
And so after she did the Now Foundations program, which boosted her phonological skills, changed ability to decode and sound out words, which should also have changed ability to phonetically spell words. And over time, sight words should start to be getting stronger unless there's visual perceptual, sensory processing, visual motor difficulties. Then you also did the mental imagery, which is a different program that works back here on this part of the brain, which is the comprehension system. It's better for listening comprehension. It empowers reading comprehension, and it empowers the student to be able to formulate their own ideas, their own thoughts, to explain things to you verbally or in writing to get a more clear communication. And then you guys did a third program, which is like, okay, what else could be left? Well, now you got to write. Yeah. And that's a different grammar, punctuation, spelling. Typically for most kids with dyslexia, they've struggled so much just to read and spell. They've not really had any work on sentence writing because they couldn't spell enough words to make a sentence.
And we haven't done that piece yet. We did math.
Gotcha.
And
math was a bigger piece for her than the writing was.
I think so. I think, yeah, but I would say probably. Okay. And it's not that we wouldn't want to do the writing. Also, I think
you got to pick and choose. It's a resource. Yeah, absolutely. I get, and that's why it's unique in how the Now Foundations program builds that first thing. And nowprograms.com has those 4 programs. We know that everyone has to do the first one because that's always the core system, is that phonological reading spelling system. Majority of people need the second program. Not everyone needs the writing program and not everyone needs the math. So these other 2 programs are more optional. And if we get those first 2 down, then the school's instruction by itself might be enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think too, some of the like speech to text, like she can get her ideas out and then, I do want to say too, just for transparency and so parents understand, I think after we came back, Maeve could read, right? Mm-hmm. And she, but she didn't want to yet, right? Yeah.
Love for it wasn't there yet.
Yeah. Right. You're talking about years of struggle, right?
It's an unpleasant experience for most of her life.
Yeah. With the exception of the Now programs, which she loved, right? Like she would, if our resources were endless, we'd all go to OT. But she didn't want to read. And so I'm an English teacher, right?
This supposed to like reading. Yeah.
This hurt my heart a little. But I just had to say, okay, she can read functionally and maybe that's all it's ever going to be for her. And just this year, she found a book she loved.
Is it a series? Is there like several books?
It is.
Good.
Yeah. And so she was very excited for the first time over Christmas break. She threw me out of her room. Get out of here. I'm reading.
Okay, I'm leaving.
I said, I've been praying for this.
Nice.
See ya.
Very nice.
And just, I'm sure you've read Marianne Wolf's, I think it was Read or Come Home, but where she talks about like the neuromotor activity that happens when people read an image, right?
Yep.
The development of empathy that happens from reading fiction, right?
Exactly.
Like, this is the English teacher part of me going, this is so important.
Yeah. This is how you learn about the world. In many ways, it's through books.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there are other ways too, of course, but so of course we had the functional relief, and then also for me, just like this recent, I found a book I love, and she's falling in love with the magic of reading, the magic of being in a world that you're not in, right? And so that's been a long time coming, but we're thrilled.
Fantastic. Well, Jenny, I really appreciate you taking the time to share your journey and Maeve's journey with us. We wish it was a journey that didn't take so many years. And I've spent my whole lifetime working on this, nothing else. Literally since the age of 19, I've been working to try to help empower, provide more services, make more accessible services. And I did want to go back to your point about cost and let people know who are watching. We now, for the first time just this last year, brought in a price point that's more like $30 to $35 an hour, or $50 to $55 an hour, and it's $85 to $90 an hour is what's going to be going forward, because our costs are going up again, sadly. But we have a way to get services available at a lower price point. I also built the nation's first free charter school. Nobody pays to go there. I have 120 kids in that school. It requires you to go live in Gainesville, Florida. And believe it or not, we've had families who've moved to Gainesville for a year and got free intervention for a year and then moved back home. Or ironically, we had one little girl, her grandma lived in Gainesville and her family lived in a different state. So she went and lived with grandma for a year and went to the Einstein School for a year. So we were very aware of cost obstacles. And I've done a ton to try to mitigate and decrease them. And I'll be doing even more this year. I'm happy to say we have a new nonprofit just opening. It's called the Literacy Transformation Institute. I'm not a part of it, not a board member. I helped set it up. I got people involved in it. They will run it, but it will provide partial scholarships to families to go to nowprograms.com and get these services. It will provide partial scholarships for families to go to the Morris Center clinics or online companies or other clinics like these and give that same caliber of service. So we're trying to make those price points lower. And then one other plug I have to put in, because we're really excited about this, because this could have helped Maeve when she was 5. We have a new app. It's called Lip Letterland. It's a crazy, silly name. And we jokingly say, if your kid can't say Lip Letterland and says Whip Letterland, they definitely need this app, because this app is for 4 to 6-year-olds or just kids who are still struggling with basic letters and sounds. And it basically takes the first 2 to 3 parts of that Now Foundations program, and it gamifies it in an iPhone or iPod tablet type of app environment. And it costs you $6.99 a month. Oh, and by the way, if you have several kids, you can put up to 4 of the kids on for the $7 a month. So basically it's $1.75 a month per kid. So we've made price point not an obstacle in access to the app. And it's available globally, all across the world. That's so wonderful. Our hope is that more kids like Maeve get more services sooner and don't have to go to the expense and the time and demands that you guys did. But I'm also happy to say, if it's just now your child's 10, 14, or 24, and you're just realizing they still haven't gotten the empowerment yet, that's why we have these nowprograms.com and the Morris Center's clinics, is we can change those skills in just a few months of intensive instruction.
That is what I will say to anyone wondering, if I knew then what I know now.
Yeah.
With the unofficial diagnosis of dyslexia, we would have gone to the Morris Center and stayed until it was done.
Yeah.
And she would have been 7.
Yeah. Yeah. And the good news is you got it before she was 37.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's still many years of success, but like you pointed out, which is really important, there's been years of trauma, and it really is emotional trauma, where she felt like she's less than. She felt like she was not as intelligent. And we could just try to gloss over that, tell her she's got 5 superpowers, and pretend that the work environment should adapt and change to meet her strengths and ignore her weaknesses. But that's not necessary.
Right.
Why not just take the weaker skills and make him stronger? Then she's in charge and she's in control. And Jenny, I can't thank you enough for sharing Maeve's story, because that's where Maeve is at today.
Yeah. Yeah.
She's got-
That's amazing. We're so grateful.
Thank you so much. Well, we'll be back again in 2 weeks with another Dyslexia Success Story. This podcast is recorded, so families can watch it later at their own convenience. We try to do it at lunchtime, and we thank you for taking your lunchtime, Jenny, as well. Although we know that everyone doesn't have lunchtime in this time at all, across all the time zones.
My brunch.
In Colorado. And we look forward for more success, and we'll probably ping you again in 3 years and say, can we do a Where Is She Now podcast? Yeah. We want to know where she's at in the next 3 years. We want to know what's happening. Believe it or not, some of our podcasts are people we treated 20 years ago. Where are they at today? 10 years ago, where are they at today? That's the fun part, to see when you've really unlocked those full literacy skills, those full comprehension skills, you've empowered the self-esteem back up again, and they've now run with it and built their own careers, their own families. And then we get second generation dyslexic kids coming through. And the goal is we want to help as big as possible. So we're super happy for you, your husband, Maeve. Her brother will be less frustrated too, because there's less family stress.
Right.
Some of them there'll be less financial stress. Mm-hmm. And that's the goal. Empower the family, empower the kids.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. We will be back again 2 weeks from now, and we'll be doing another Dyslexia Success Story. Next week, we'll actually also have another Dyslexia Discussions talk. And we look forward to sharing more positive, empowering information for you about dyslexia and other learning disabilities.